The butterfly spline bit, like this one from Freud, creates a double dovetail positive profile, which frankly looks more like a bow tie than a butterfly, and can be made in a wide variety of sizes for different applications. Here I've got an oak board with some major checking in the ends. The larger crack will be removed completely, but the smaller one can be saved and even turned into a detail by adding a reinforcing spline across the split. I want the butterfly spline to be 1.5 inches tall, so the center point of the bit is set to 3/4 of an inch. Then the router fence is set so that the bit will cut across the face of the 1.5 inch wide stock, but without removing any of the thickness of the stock, ending at points on both corners. Once the setup is complete, both sides of the stock are milled, and a small slice is cross-cut off one end, just a little bit thicker than the depth of the patch I want to create. The patch is then laid in place on the board, and the border scribed with a sharp knife to accurately mark the border of the pocket that the spline will be let into. A sharp chisel, guided by the cut lines from the knife, is used to create the borders of the pocket. The pocket and spline can be quite deep if needed to hold a crack together, or can be more shallow if you're just covering a knot or a defect. A small router bit is used to clean away the waste in the pocket, being careful not to overlap the edges, which are then cleaned and squared up using the chisel again. With a little care, the spline will fit snugly into the pocket and can be glued and tapped into place. The spline can be a contrasting wood to become an accent feature, or made from the same material to make it a little less noticeable. The dovetail spline can also be used as a joinery feature, holding this breadboard edge tight in place, but still allowing for wood movement. Both edges to be joined require a dovetail slot cut in them, and anytime I'm going to mill a dovetail slot, I prefer to create a relief slot, removing most of the material before I use the dovetail bit. This makes for cleaner cuts and greatly increases the life of my dovetail bit because the relief slot allows the chips to clear much more easily. The relief slot should be centered where the dovetail slot will be cut. The two dovetail slots, when put together, create the butterfly profile that needs to be filled. In this case, the spline will be 3/4 of an inch tall and 1/2 inch thick. So the center point of the bit is set to 3/8 of an inch, and the fence set so that the V cuts exactly 3/4 of an inch tall. A pass across each face creates the butterfly spline. Because this spline will end up relatively small, for safety's sake, I'm milling it out of a wider piece of stock, then carefully ripping the spline from the larger piece. We want this joint to hold together without showing any gaps, so the fit should be very snug. Working carefully, I can get a spline that will hold the two parts together as if they were glued, but the spline is only actually secured in the center with a dowel or a little bit of glue. This will hold the spline in place, but still allow wood movement in the cross-grain situation. I've also used butterfly splines as a design feature. The shape locks parts together mechanically and is attractive looking as well. So I've used them as feet for serving trays, as seen here. As before, a traditional dovetail slot is used to house the spline, so the waste is plowed away before the dovetail slot is actually cut. This dovetail slot will be 1 inch wide, but I don't actually need a 1 inch wide dovetail bit to cut it. I've marked out the slots and will make 2 passes with the dovetail bit to create the full slot. At the router table, you always want to be cutting against the bit rotation. So I set the fence to cut the inside of the dovetail slot on the first pass milling both slots before resetting the fence to mill the other side. The router table fence is reset so that the bit will cut the other side of the slot, and these cuts are made going from left to right, so that again I'm working against the bit rotation. This is the only safe way of making this cut.
Now the spline stock that will become the feet is made.
The butterfly spline bit is set up the same way as before, and a piece of 1-inch stock is run on both sides to create the spline. I prefer to start by milling the spline just a little bit too thick, then resetting the router fence just a little bit. This allows me to sneak up on the fit and make sure that it's exactly the way I want it. I keep checking the fit and repeating this process until I get it exactly where I want it. It should slide together, but show no gaps between the two pieces. The spline is then ripped from the stock and cross-cut as needed to fit the project. So whether you need an interesting decorative feature for your project, mechanical joinery that allows for wood movement, or you want to hide or reinforce a flaw, the dovetail spline bit gives you the options needed
to get the job done right. You can find more great woodworking info on our website at woodcademy.com.